The assembly hall stretched for nearly a kilometer under the artificial sky of Concord Prime. Ambassador walked through the massive doors, his footsteps echoing against marble floors that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic politics. Behind him, Captain Park kept pace, her military uniform crisp and her expression neutral. She carried a data case that held evidence that could change everything. Had been Earth's voice in this chamber for 3 years. He had learned to read the subtle movements of species that had no faces humans could understand. He knew when to click their mandibles in disapproval, when they changed colors to signal contempt, when the ancients simply refused to acknowledge a speaker existed at all. Today, he would need all that knowledge. The chamber filled slowly. Representatives from 400 species took their places in the circular arrangement. Some floated in gravity fields. Others required methane atmospheres in sealed pods. A few were so massive they appeared only as holograms. The diversity was breathtaking, but had learned that diversity in appearance did not mean diversity in thought. High Arbiter Axis called the session to order. The reptilian's voice rumbled through translation devices, speaking in the formal cadence that marked official business. Waded through 3 minor disputes about trade routes and mining rights. He watched the assembly function as it always did, slowly, carefully, with endless respect for tradition and procedure. When his turn came, stood. The human delegation section was small, tucked between species that had held their seats for. Earth had only joined 12 years ago. Some representatives still referred to humans as the new ones with barely concealed amusement. Honored Arbiter, esteemed representatives, began. His voice was calm, measured. I bring urgent evidence of violations in the Outer Rim territories. The Hive Collective has been conducting illegal military operations in zones prohibited by the Accord of Seven Suns. A ripple of movement went through the chamber. Counselor, the Hive representative, rose from his position. The compound eyes reflected the chamber lights in 1,000 directions. Baseless accusations from a species barely capable of understanding our history. Continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. We have genetic samples proving bioweapon development. We have communication intercepts showing coordination of military buildups. We have testimony from survivors of attacks on neutral colonies. He gestured to who activated the display screens. Data filled the air above the assembly floor. Images of destroyed settlements, chemical analyses of weapons that violated 3 separate treaties, recorded transmissions in Hive military codes, had spent 8 months gathering this evidence. It was thorough, documented, and impossible to dismiss through normal procedures. The assembly watched the display in silence, then began to laugh. It was a chittering sound that the translation devices rendered as cruel amusement. The humans bring us pictures and claim conspiracy. How charming, how very primitive. Other species joined the laughter. Not all of them, saw some representatives leaning forward, studying the data with interest. But the old powers, the species that had run the assembly since before Earth had discovered fire, they laughed. High Arbiter Axis raised one clawed hand. Ambassador, your enthusiasm is noted. However, the assembly has reviewed Outer Rim activities many times. The Hive Collective operates within established parameters. Perhaps human monitoring equipment is simply not sophisticated enough to understand what you observe. Felt tense beside him. He kept his own expression carefully blank. Arbiter, I request formal investigation protocols. The evidence meets all thresholds for immediate review. Request, Axis said simply. Young species often misunderstand complex galactic affairs. The Hive Collective's activities are a matter of internal development, not assembly concern. This matter is closed. Looked around the chamber. He saw knowing looks exchanged between certain species. He saw others deliberately studying their data tablets, refusing to meet his eyes. He saw the careful dance of power politics that prioritize stability over truth, relationships over justice. Captain leaned close and whispered urgently. 3 more colonies just went dark. Station, New, and Terra Nova 7. Communications cut off mid-transmission. 3 colonies, thousands of human lives, while the assembly laughed. Had known this moment might come. Earth's leaders had discussed it in secret meetings deep inside Luna Base. They had made contingency plans. They had prepared for the possibility that the galaxy's great parliament would prove to be nothing more than theater. He reached down and methodically gathered his materials. Every data chip, every physical document, every piece of evidence that the assembly had refused to examine. His movements were precise and unhurried. Around the chamber, representatives began to notice that something unusual was happening. Stood with him. Then every member of the human delegation rose from their seats. 12 diplomats, 8 military attaches, 4 scientific advisors, all stood in perfect silence. The laughter died away. Confusion replaced it. Looked directly at High Arbiter Axis. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the vast chamber without any need for amplification. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Assembly, effective immediately. Axis blinked slowly, his ancient eyes struggling to process what he'd heard. Ambassador, you cannot simply. We can, said. We are. You had one chance to do the right thing. You chose politics. You chose convenience. You chose the comfort of ignoring hard truths. That is your right as an assembly, and it is our right to no longer participate in this farce. He turned and began walking toward the exit. The entire human delegation followed in formation. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. 400 species watched them go, too shocked to respond. Found his voice first. You cannot leave. There are procedures, protocols. You must file formal withdrawal notices, attend separation hearings, negotiate transitional. Didn't stop walking. He didn't look back. He simply raised one hand in a dismissive gesture and let it fall. Behind them, the assembly chamber erupted into chaos. Species shouted in dozens of languages. The High Arbiter called for order. Emergency protocols activated, but none of it mattered. The humans walked out through the massive doors and didn't return. In the corridor outside spoke quietly. Command confirms. Fleet recall has begun. All personnel are returning to Sol system. Embassy closures are in progress across the galaxy. Nodded. He felt surprisingly calm. Humanity had spent 12 years learning how the galaxy worked. Now they would show the galaxy who humans really were. How long until they realize? Asked. That we've been planning this for months. That every human ship is already moving. That we pulled all our assets 3 days ago. Allowed himself a small smile. Too long. By the time they understand what's happening, we'll be ready for what comes next. They walked toward the docking bay where their ship waited. Behind them, the greatest political institution in galactic history tried desperately to understand what had just happened. They would learn soon enough. 2 weeks passed. Trader Prince L sat in his private office aboard the merchant station Golden Exchange and watched the market data with growing concern. The prince dealt in information as much as goods, and what he was seeing made no sense. Every human trading vessel had vanished. Not destroyed, not lost, simply recalled. Ships that had been mid-route to deliver cargo had turned around and headed back toward Sol system. Human merchants had closed their accounts, withdrawn their credits, and disappeared overnight. L's trading network, which connected thousands of species across the galaxy, suddenly had a human-shaped hole in it. He pulled up transaction records from 2 weeks ago. The day before the assembly incident, human traders had liquidated their holdings. They'd converted everything to portable assets. They'd pulled out of long-term contracts, paying penalties without complaint. It was as if they'd known exactly what was coming. They planned this, L said to himself. His 4 arms moved across multiple data screens at once, for months, maybe longer. His assistant, a young named Pix, floated into the office. Prince, we have confirmation. All human embassies are closed. Every diplomatic channel is silent. They're not responding to any communication. L leaned back in his chair. He'd been trading for 70 years. He'd seen species rise and fall, empires expand and collapse, but he'd never seen anything like this. An entire species simply withdrawing from galactic society in perfect coordination. What does the assembly say? He asked. They're debating sanctions. Counselor wants to punish Earth for disrespect to ancient institutions. Others are calling it a tantrum from an immature species. Al made a gesture of disagreement with all 4 hands. Fools, this isn't a tantrum, this is strategy. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Song stood in her laboratory on the Xenobiology Research Station orbiting 442b. She was packing her equipment, downloading decades of research data onto portable drives. Around her, other human scientists were doing the same. Her colleague Al watched in distress. You're really leaving, all of you, but we're in the middle of the protein synthesis project. Continued packing without pause. I'm sorry, orders came from Earth. All humans are to return home immediately. But why? Because of some political argument. Science shouldn't stop for politics. Paused and looked at her colleague of 8 years. Al had been a good friend. They'd published 17 papers together. They'd made genuine breakthroughs in understanding cross-species biology. For a moment, wanted to explain, but her orders were clear. You ignored our warnings about the Hive Collective, she said quietly. You'll see the truth soon enough. I hope it's not too late for you. She picked up her last case and walked toward the docking bay. Al called after her but didn't look back. Within 6 hours, the station was empty of humans. They left everything running, all systems operational. They just left. Sent one final message before her ship entered faster-than-light travel. It broadcast on all scientific channels, to every species that monitored research frequencies. Her face appeared on screens across the galaxy. "This is Dr. Song, final message from the human scientific community. We came to you with evidence of violations. You dismissed us. We offered cooperation. You laughed. Now we're going home. When you finally see what we tried to show you, remember that you chose not to listen." The broadcast ended. Every human frequency went dark. Lee stood on the observation deck of the Frontier Monitoring Station at the edge of human space. He was the communications officer, and for the past 3 days he'd been watching sensors as the last human installations shut down in perfect sequence. "Energy spike," his assistant called out. "Sector 7, Human Colonial Zone." Pulled up the readings. Massive power signatures were appearing across what had been human territory. The patterns were unlike anything in the galactic databases. The station's AI ran analysis after analysis and came up with nothing. "What are they building out there?" his assistant asked. "I don't know," said, "but whatever it is, they've been doing it quietly for a long time." An alert flashed on his screen. "Sir, we have incoming vessels. Hive Collective Fleet 40 ships. They're heading for the abandoned human colonies." I'd been expecting this. The Hive had been eager to claim human territory ever since the walkout. They saw it as free real estate, theirs for the taking. "Track them," he ordered, "and send the data to Fleet Command." He watched the Hive ships approach Nu, one of the colonies that had gone dark 2 weeks ago. The planet appeared lifeless from orbit. The Hive fleet moved into position around it, clearly planning to claim the entire system. Then the weapons platforms activated. Sensors lit up with new contacts. Defensive installations that had been sitting dormant suddenly powered up. They surrounded the planet in a perfect grid, technology that no one had seen before. The Hive fleet detected them too, could hear the confused chatter on their communication channels. They were scanning the platforms, trying to understand what they were seeing. "Send warning to the Hive fleet," Commander ordered. "Tell them those defenses are still active." But before the message could be sent, one Hive ship moved too close to the planet. The weapons platforms locked on. Warning alarms blared across the Hive frequency. The ship tried to retreat. The platforms didn't fire. They simply tracked the ship as it fled. A clear message: "Come closer and find out what happens." The Hive fleet recorded everything and sent it to Earth Command. Then he began the final shutdown sequence for the monitoring station. The humans were leaving, but they weren't leaving the territory undefended. Back on Concord Prime, the Galactic Assembly convened in emergency session. High Arbiter Axis looked older than his 2,000 years. The chamber was filled with worried representatives. "We have confirmed reports," Axis announced. "Humanity has completely withdrawn from all galactic territories. Their colonies are abandoned. Their ships have vanished. They are not responding to any diplomatic outreach." Counselor clicked his mandibles in irritation. "Good riddance. Let them sulk in their home system. We should focus on reclaiming the valuable territories they left behind." A representative spoke up. "We attempted to survey the abandoned human worlds. There are defensive installations of unknown capability protecting every single one. Our analysis suggests the technology is significantly advanced beyond standard military equipment." The chamber fell silent, shifted uncomfortably. Another representative, a military advisor, brought up data on the main display. "We've been reviewing human activities over the past 12 years. We now believe their entire membership in this assembly was a reconnaissance operation. They were studying us while pretending to be eager newcomers. They mapped our technology, learned our politics, and prepared for this withdrawal." Axis felt a cold dread settling in his ancient bones. "You're saying they planned this from the beginning?" "We're saying they're far more sophisticated than we assumed, and we don't know what they're planning next." Stood angrily. "This is paranoid nonsense. They're primitives who got their feelings hurt. In a few months they'll come crawling back, begging to rejoin." But even as he spoke, reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Human installations going dark in perfect coordination. Human military assets disappearing from sensors. Strange energy readings from Sol system itself, suggesting construction on a massive scale. Trader Prince L sent a message to the assembly that night. It was brief and to the point. "I've been tracking galactic commerce for 70 years. Humanity just executed the most perfect economic withdrawal I've ever seen. They planned this for at least 6 months, possibly longer. They're not coming back, and whatever they're building in Sol system is going to change everything." The message was ignored by most representatives, but some, the ones who'd been paying attention, began to worry. In the darkness between stars, human ships moved with purpose toward home. They carried people, knowledge, and quiet determination. The galaxy had laughed at them. The galaxy had dismissed their warnings. The galaxy had chosen politics over truth. Now the galaxy would learn what happened when you underestimated humanity. Fleet Commander Shin stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. Around her, 6 battle groups held position in complete stealth, invisible to conventional sensors. They had been waiting here for 3 weeks, silent and patient. "Status report," she ordered. Her tactical officer responded immediately. "All vessels ready. Shadow Fleet is in position at all 6 target systems. Intelligence confirms Hive military installations are operating at normal capacity. They have no idea we're here." Nodded. She had spent 15 years building the Shadow Fleet in secret, hidden from the galaxy's prying eyes. While Earth had sent diplomatic ships and trade vessels into galactic space, playing the role of eager newcomers, they had also been building something else entirely. Ships that used technology Earth had developed independently, quietly, without sharing any details with the assembly. "Open the channel," she said. "All frequencies. I want every species in the galaxy to hear this." Her communications officer worked quickly. Within seconds, space appeared on screens across hundreds of worlds. In homes, offices, government buildings, and military command centers, beings of every species stopped what they were doing to watch. "My name is Fleet Commander Shin of the United Earth Space Forces," she began. Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "For 8 months, we have been gathering evidence of crimes committed by the Hive Collective. We brought that evidence to the Galactic Assembly. You laughed. You dismissed us. You chose politics over justice." She gestured, and the display behind her filled with data. Not the simple evidence that had shown the assembly, but hundreds of files, thousands of images, detailed records of everything humanity had discovered. "These are the breeding worlds," continued. 16 planets where the Hive Collective has been creating warrior drones in violation of every galactic law. They're not just building armies. They're genetically engineering slave species designed to feel no pain, no fear, no independent thought. They're creating living weapons. The images showed laboratories filled with growing pods, creatures in various stages of development, all of them designed for war. The detail was staggering. Every facility mapped, every research program documented, years of careful intelligence work. "These are the weapons factories," said, changing the display. 47 installations producing banned military equipment, chemical weapons, biological agents, planet-killer devices that were outlawed 3,000 years ago. The Hive has been preparing for war while sitting on the Assembly Council and preaching peace. More images, manufacturing facilities operating in hidden systems, supply chains stretching across forbidden territories, financial records showing how the Hive had been funding these operations through shell companies and corrupt intermediaries. Counselor appeared on split screen, transmitted from Concord Prime. His compound eyes reflected panic. "This is lies, human fabrication. These images are fake." Smiled without humor. "Are they? Then explain how we have genetic samples from your breeding worlds. Explain how we have testimony from 12 slave species you thought you'd eliminated. Explain how we have communication intercepts from your own military commanders discussing these operations." She turned to look directly at the camera. "We have evidence because we've been inside your facilities. We've walked through your laboratories. We've spoken to your victims. While you thought we were primitive newcomers playing at politics, we were infiltrating every level of your operations." Nam appeared on the screen beside. The Special Operations Infiltrator looked calm despite having spent 6 months living undercover in Hive territory. "I personally placed monitoring devices in 14 of their command centers. My team extracted samples from their genetic archives. We documented everything." The galactic audience watched in stunned silence. This wasn't speculation or circumstantial evidence. This was comprehensive intelligence gathered through patient, professional espionage. The kind of operation that took years of planning and resources that suggested serious military capability. Ambassador appeared next, broadcasting from Earth. She had been one of the first human diplomats sent to the Assembly before. Now she spoke with the authority of someone who had watched the galaxy's great powers for over a decade. "We spent 12 years learning how your system works," said. "We attended your sessions. We studied your procedures. We participated in your politics. And we learned that the Galactic Assembly is not a force for justice. It's a tool for maintaining power structures. The old species do whatever they want, and the Assembly looks away." She brought up more data. "The Hive Collective isn't the only one committing violations. We have evidence of 17 other species engaging in illegal activities. We have records of the Assembly deliberately ignoring complaints from smaller species. We have testimony from hundreds of civilizations that came to you seeking justice and found only bureaucracy." High Arbiter Axis appeared on another split screen. The ancient reptilian's face showed shock and anger. You dare accuse the assembly itself? This is outrageous. You spent 12 years lying to us. We spent 12 years learning the truth, replied coldly. You want to know what we learned? That your ancient institutions are corrupt and broken, that your complex galactic affairs are just excuses for inaction, that your entire system exists to protect the powerful and ignore everyone else. Took control of the broadcast again. We tried your justice, you laughed at us, so now we'll dispense our own. She made a gesture, and across 6 star systems simultaneously, the Shadow Fleet. Hundreds of warships appeared out of nowhere, surrounding Hive military installations. The tactical display showed their positions in real time. The ships were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Sleek, angular, covered in stealth plating that bent sensor waves. Armed with weapons that energy signatures suggested were significantly more advanced than standard galactic military equipment. His face showed pure terror now. You can't attack us. This is an act of war. The Assembly will. The Assembly will do nothing, interrupted, because they're not a military power. They're a debate club, and we're done debating. She turned to her tactical officer. Execute Operation Clean Sweep. Disable all military installations in the target systems. Minimize casualties, but make it clear that resistance is futile. The Hive Collective's military forces scrambled to respond. Alarms blared across their bases. Ships launched in confusion. Defensive systems activated. It didn't matter. The first engagement lasted 4 hours. Human ships moved with precision that spoke of extensive planning and practice. They targeted power generators, weapon systems, communication arrays. They used electronic warfare to blind Hive sensors. They employed tactics that the Hive commanders had never encountered before. When the smoke cleared, 17 Hive capital ships were drifting hulks. Another 34 had been disabled. Hundreds of smaller vessels sat dead in space. The casualties were surprisingly low. The humans had targeted systems, not crew, but the message was unmistakable. Earth's fleet had not lost a single ship, not one. Across the galaxy, military analysts watched the battle recordings in disbelief. Species that had spent developing their naval doctrines saw those doctrines rendered obsolete in 4 hours. The humans fought with speed, coordination, and technological superiority that suggested they were decades ahead of galactic standard. Trader Prince L sent a single message to his contacts. I told you they were more sophisticated than we assumed. I was wrong. They're not more sophisticated. They're leagues ahead. Broadcast one final message before the Shadow Fleet moved to its next target. The Hive Collective will face justice for their crimes. Any species that attempts to interfere will face the same response. Any species that wishes to help us bring accountability to the galaxy is welcome to join us. But make no mistake, the age of empty assemblies and ignored crimes is over. The broadcast ended. The galaxy watched in fear as humanity, the species they had laughed at and dismissed, revealed itself to be the most dangerous military power they had encountered in centuries. In the assembly chamber on Concord Prime, silence reigned. High Arbiter Axis looked at his fellow representatives and saw fear reflected back at him. They had made a terrible mistake, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. General Bay stood on the surface of what the Hive called Breeding World 7. Around him, his ground forces moved through the massive facility with practiced efficiency. They had liberated this place 3 hours ago. Now came the hard part, dealing with what they'd found inside. The creatures in the pods were alive but barely conscious. Genetic experiments designed to be soldiers who couldn't question orders. Some looked almost human. Others were twisted combinations of species the general didn't recognize. All of them had been bred for one purpose: war. Sir, we found the control center, his lieutenant reported. The records are intact. Everything is documented. Walked through corridors lined with growth chambers. Each one held a being that had never asked to exist. The Hive scientists had kept meticulous records, DNA sequences, training programs, expected capabilities. It was clinical, efficient, and absolutely horrifying. A young soldier approached him, her face pale. General, there are children in Sector 4, actual children from a dozen species. They were taken from their families for genetic sampling. Felt rage surge through him, but he kept his voice level. Get them to the medical ships, contact their home worlds, document everything, he paused, and make sure gets footage of this. Han was already there, her camera recording every detail. She was a war correspondent who had insisted on embedding with the frontline forces. Now she stood in the breeding chambers, broadcasting to the entire galaxy. This is Han reporting from inside a Hive Collective breeding facility, she said to the camera. Her voice was steady despite the horror around her. What you're seeing is real. These are living beings created in violation of every galactic law. The Galactic Assembly knew about these facilities. We brought them evidence 8 months ago. They chose to ignore it. She walked through the chambers, showing the galaxy what humanity had discovered. Genetic laboratories, training facilities, records of thousands of slave soldiers created and deployed across Hive territory. Behind me, you can see General Bay's forces working to free these beings, continued. The question everyone should be asking is, why did it take a war to make this stop? Why didn't the Assembly act when they had the chance? Her broadcast went viral across the galaxy. Species that had supported the Assembly's calls for sanctions against Earth suddenly found themselves defending the indefensible. Public opinion began to shift. On Concord Prime, the Galactic Assembly was falling apart. High Arbiter Axis called for order as representatives shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate action against Earth. Others insisted the Assembly investigate the Hive Collective's crimes. A few younger species openly questioned why they should remain in an institution that had failed so spectacularly. Ambassador watched the chaos from Earth. She was the new voice of humanity's position, replacing who had moved to military advisory, had a reputation for being direct to the point of bluntness. When the Assembly sent envoys to Sol System to negotiate, she met them in orbit around Earth, not at some neutral location, not at the Assembly, on humanity's terms. "You want to negotiate?" asked the delegation. 7 species had sent representatives, all of them looking uncomfortable in the human orbital station. "Negotiate what? The Hive Collective's surrender. We're already handling that. The Assembly's authority. You don't have any over us. We left, remember." A diplomat tried to salvage the situation. "Ambassador, surely we can find common ground. The Assembly recognizes that mistakes were made." "Mistakes?" His voice was sharp. "You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose politics over justice. You chose comfort over action. You chose to laugh at us when we brought you evidence of crimes against thousands of innocent beings." She stood and walked to the viewport, looking down at Earth. "My planet has 3 billion people on it. We're just one species, barely into space by your standards. But we managed to do what your galaxy-spanning Assembly couldn't. We enforced the law. Why should we ever trust your institutions again?" The envoys had no answer. The war continued. General's forces moved from one breeding world to the next, liberating facility after facility. The freed slaves told stories that horrified even battle-hardened soldiers. Families torn apart. Children taken for experiments. Entire communities erased to provide genetic material. The Hive Collective's military tried to mount a defense, but they were outmatched. Humanity didn't fight according to galactic conventions. There were no formal battle lines, no honor-bound rules of engagement. Earth's forces struck command centers, cut supply lines, and used psychological warfare that left Hive commanders paralyzed with fear. Admiral Minu, commanding the Second Fleet, demonstrated this when the Hive attempted to use a forbidden weapon. It was a virus designed to target Earth-type biology, something they'd been developing in secret for years. They launched it from a hidden base in the Outer Rim. The virus never reached its target. Earth's intelligence had known about the weapon for months. Admiral Minu's ships destroyed the launch facility 17 minutes after the weapon activated. Every backup site was eliminated within an hour. "They thought they had a secret weapon," Admiral Minu said in his report. "They didn't realize we'd been watching them build it. We knew the location of every scientist who worked on it, every facility that produced components, every ship equipped to deploy it. They never had a chance." It was demoralizing for the Hive and terrifying for everyone else. Humanity's intelligence capabilities were far beyond what anyone had imagined. They'd infiltrated everything. They'd seen everything. While playing the role of naive newcomers, they'd been conducting the most comprehensive espionage operation in galactic history. 6 weeks after the war began, the Hive Collective sued for peace. They sent representatives to negotiate surrender terms. Earth didn't respond. The war continued. Counselor, now desperate, broadcast a message throughout the galaxy. "The humans are monsters. They refuse our surrender. They continue to attack despite our pleas for mercy." Shin responded publicly. "You surrender after losing 40% of your military. What about the species you enslaved? What about the colonies you destroyed? What about the laws you violated for decades? You don't get to commit crimes and then cry for mercy the moment you face consequences." The galaxy watched as humanity systematically dismantled the Hive Collective's military infrastructure. Every illegal installation was destroyed. Every genetic laboratory was shut down. Every forbidden weapon was confiscated or eliminated. And through it all, Han broadcast everything. She showed the freed slaves reuniting with their families. She showed the evidence of hive crimes. She showed the scale of what the Assembly had ignored. Public pressure mounted. Species that had initially supported the Assembly's position began withdrawing that support. Younger civilizations, seeing humanity's willingness to act, started reaching out to Earth directly. They wanted treaties. They wanted protection. They wanted to be part of whatever humanity was building. Trader Prince L saw the shift happening in real time. His trading network was reorganizing around Earth. Species were bypassing the Assembly to deal directly with humans. The economic power structure was changing. He sent another message to the Assembly. You're becoming irrelevant. In 6 weeks, humanity has done what you couldn't do in 6,000 years. They've enforced galactic law. Species are already choosing Earth over the Assembly. If you don't reform, you'll collapse. High Arbiter Axis read the message and felt the weight of his 2,000 years. He had spent centuries maintaining the Assembly's status. Now that status was crumbling, destroyed by a species barely 200 years into space travel. The Hive Collective finally accepted unconditional surrender. They agreed to trials, to reparations, to complete military dismantling. They had no choice. Humanity didn't negotiate. They simply continued until the Hive had nothing left to fight with. On the liberated breeding worlds, the freed slaves began rebuilding their lives. Forces stayed to help, providing medical care and resources. The general watched a family reunite, a mother seeing her children for the first time in 3 years, and felt that the cost had been worth it. But the cost had been real. The galaxy would never be the same. The old powers had been exposed as weak, the Assembly had been revealed as corrupt, and humanity had shown itself willing to reshape the galactic order through overwhelming force. The question now was, what came next? 6 months after humanity walked out of the Galactic Assembly, President stood before the leaders of 47 species in the council chamber of Luna Base. These weren't the old powers. These were younger civilizations, smaller nations, species that had spent centuries being ignored by the Assembly. "We appreciate you coming to Sol System," said. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. "You've all asked the same question. What does Earth want? What are we building here?" She gestured to the viewport where Earth hung in the darkness. "We want what we tried to get through the Assembly. Justice, accountability, a system where evidence matters more than politics, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." A representative spoke up. "The Assembly still exists. They're calling for you to return to face judgment for your actions against the Hive." Smiled without humor. Face judgment for stopping genetic slavery, for enforcing laws they refuse to enforce. I don't think so. She brought up a holographic display. "Here's what's actually happening. 23 species have already signed direct treaties with Earth. 47 more, including all of you, are negotiating agreements. Trade is flowing through human channels now, not Assembly networks. Security is being provided by our fleets, not Assembly peacekeepers who never actually keep peace." A young representative from a species called the raised her hand hesitantly. "What about the Assembly? Will you really let it collapse?" "That depends on them," said. "If they reform, we'll return. If they stay corrupt, they'll become irrelevant. Either way, the galaxy is changing." Admiral, the former ambassador now serving as military advisor, stepped forward. He had come full circle from his diplomatic role. "We've spent the past 6 months proving we can enforce galactic law. The Hive Collective is disarmed. Their victims are free. Their crimes are documented. We did this without the Assembly. The question is, does the galaxy need the Assembly anymore?" The meeting continued for hours. By the end, 32 of the attending species had signed preliminary agreements with Earth. The rest promised to return with their government's decisions. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone knew it. On Concord Prime, High Arbiter Axis convened an emergency session. The Assembly chamber felt empty despite being full. Representatives attended because they had to, not because they believed the institution still mattered. "We must address the reality we face," Axis said, his ancient voice tired. "Humanity has created a parallel structure. Species are choosing them over us. If we do nothing, the Assembly will dissolve within the year." Counselor was no longer present. He had been removed from his position and was awaiting trial by his own people for his role in the Hive's crimes. The new Hive representative, a younger member of their species, spoke quietly. "Perhaps the Assembly deserves to dissolve. We committed atrocities while sitting on the council. No one stopped us. What is the Assembly for if not to prevent such things?" The words hung in the chamber. No one could argue against them. An elder, one of the oldest members of the Assembly, spoke with resignation. "We have become exactly what humanity accused us of being. A debate club, a social gathering for old powers to maintain the status. When was the last time we actually solved a problem?" Silence answered her. I propose we vote, she continued. Do we reform according to Earth's demands, or do we close the assembly with what dignity we have left? The vote took 3 days. Species argued, negotiated, and finally accepted reality. The assembly voted to reform, transparency requirements, accountability measures, enforcement mechanisms with actual teeth, everything humanity had asked for 6 months ago. Then they sent a single message to Earth: we have reformed, will you return? President read the message in her office. Around her stood the key members of Earth's leadership: Admiral Shin, General Bay, Ambassador. They had guided humanity through the most significant 6 months in their species' history. What do you think? Asked. Considered the question carefully. They've made real changes. The new charter includes everything we demanded: enforcement powers, transparent proceedings, accountability for violations. But they only changed because we forced them to, because we proved we could operate without them. The question is whether those changes will last. Spoke from her position near the window. They'll last if we maintain our capability. The galaxy respects strength. We've proven we have it. As long as we keep the Shadow Fleet operational, keep our intelligence network active, keep our willingness to act clear, they'll maintain the reforms. Nodded. We return, but not as supplicants. We return as equals, as enforcers, as the species that showed the galaxy what justice actually looks like. Made her decision. We return, but we make it clear that we're watching. Any backsliding, any return to the old ways, and we walk out again. This time, we won't need 6 months to prove our point. 1 week later, the human delegation returned to Concord Prime, walked through the same massive doors he'd walked out of 6 months ago, but everything was different now. The assembly rose when the humans entered, all 400 species standing in respect, not because of tradition or protocol, but because they understood what humanity represented: the willingness to act, the capability to enforce, the courage to stand alone. High Arbiter Axis spoke first. Ambassador, on behalf of the Galactic Assembly, we acknowledge our failures. We acknowledge that your species was right. We welcome you back, not as new members, but as equals who have earned their place through action. Stood at the human delegation's position. Captain Park stood beside him, just as she had 6 months ago. But now she wore the rank of Admiral. Now the data case she carried was just for show. Everyone knew humanity had information on everything. We return with condition, said. First, the Hive collective trials will be conducted by the freed species, with Earth oversight. Second, the Assembly's new enforcement division will include human commanders. Third, any species may request Earth's assistance in investigating violations, and we will investigate regardless of Assembly politics. He paused, looking around the chamber. And fourth, if we ever bring evidence to this chamber again, you will listen, you will investigate, you will act, because if you don't, we will, and we've proven we do it better than you. No one objected. They couldn't. The past 6 months had shown the truth of his words. Trader Prince L watched from the observation gallery. He sent a message to his network. The galaxy just changed forever. The humans are back, but they're not members anymore. They're shepherds. They're enforcers. They're the new power that everyone else has to accommodate. Captain stood beside after the session ended. They looked out at the stars through the massive windows of Concord Prime. They finally understand, she said. Nodded. They feared we'd storm out. They should have feared what we'd do after. Think the reforms will stick? Asked. They will if we make sure of it. We've built the fleet. We've built the intelligence network. We've built the alliances. Now we just maintain them, stay strong enough that no one wants to test us. Below them, the galaxy continued its work. But it was a different galaxy now. Species that had spent following the old rules had learned that those rules only mattered if someone was willing to enforce them. Humanity had shown the galaxy what enforcement looked like. On Earth, President gave an address to her people. 6 months ago, we walked out because the galaxy wouldn't listen. Today, we returned because they finally learned. We didn't win through politics or diplomacy. We won through strength, through courage, and through refusing to accept injustice. She looked directly at the camera. Some call it the human revolution. Others call it the human rebellion. I call it justice delayed but not. We showed the galaxy that being new doesn't mean being weak. That being outnumbered doesn't mean being powerless. That doing the right thing, even when everyone tells you not to, is what defines a civilization. The galaxy watched. The young species called it inspiration. The old powers called it a warning. Earth called it the beginning. Humanity had stormed out of the assembly in anger. They returned in strength, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. The age of empty assemblies was over. The age of accountability had begun. And standing at the center of it all, neither asking for permission nor apologizing for their actions, stood humanity, the species that taught the galaxy what it meant to enforce justice.